writings. American Fascist argues that dominionism seeks absolute power in a Christian state. According to Hedges, the movement bears a strong resemblance to the young fascist movements in Italy and Germany in the 1920s and 30s.
This is a new movement, as embodied by people like James Dobson or Pat Robertson or Jerry Falwell, who call for the creation of a Christian state, who talk about attaining secular power. They are more properly called dominionists or Christian reconstructionists, although it's not a widespread term, but they're certainly not traditional fundamentalists and not traditional evangelicals. They fuse the language and iconography of the Christian religion with the worst forms of American nationalism, and then created this sort of radical mutation, which has built alliances with powerful right-wing interests, including corporate interests, and made tremendous inroads over the last 2 decades into the corridors of power.
Why the term dominionist?
It comes out of Genesis, where God gives humankind dominion over creation. It's articulated by ideologues such as Rousas Rushdoony, Francis Schaeffer, and others, and it essentially is a new concept within the radical Christian right, it's used sparingly, and some dominionists don't like the term. But I think it denotes, or is probably a better term for denoting those people who want to take political power.
On the back of your book, Chris, is a quote from your professor at Harvard, Dr. James Luther Adams, who said that in a few decades, we would all be fighting, quote, Christian fascists. Who was he, and why did he think this?
James Luther Adams was my ethics professor at Harvard Divinity School. He had spent the years 1935 and 1936 in Germany working with Dietrich Bonhoeffer in the Confessing Church, or anti-Nazi church, and eventually was picked up by the Gestapo and told to leave the country. He came back, and this was in the early 1980s when I was in seminary, and saw the articulation of this new political religion, this religion that talked about seizing control of mainstream denominations, as well as institutions, creating a parallel media empire through Christian radio and broadcasting, and ultimately taking control of the government itself. And he understood, in a visceral way, how when countries fall into despair, of course this was the time that began the assault on the American working class, which has been accelerated and essentially left tens of millions of people within our own country dispossessed. He understood how demagogues use that despair. I mean, I think we could say there in many ways has been a kind of Weimarization of the American working class. And he saw what we were doing through globalization, what we were doing to our working class and our middle class, coupled with the rise of these so-called Christian demagogues as a frightening and toxic combination, which, if left unchecked, would destroy our democracy.